Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, and just as a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck, although I do think it should be fairly easy to find substitutes for those expensive cards. But before we do that, just a quick reminder to please click subscribe if you enjoy my videos. I'm currently growing the channel and I'm getting very close to 1,000 subscribers, so it would mean the world to me if you could support me. And our deck list today is going to be focusing on Goro-Goro and Satoru, a new legendary team up from March of the Machine. And if you don't know what that does, for 1 blue, 1 black and 1 red, it's a legendary creature, goblin human, 3/4 with whenever one or more creatures you control that enter the battlefield this turn deal combat damage to a player, create a 5/5 red dragon spirit creature token with flying. And then for 1 colorless and 1 red, we have creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. So this is a really powerful card. We talked about it when it was spoiled. I think it's really awesome and really fun because it has so many unique ways to build around it. And to be honest, it's a self-fueling engine because giving your creatures haste means that that first ability can always be turned on as long as you play a creature every turn. So with that in mind, we have a lot of creatures that are unblockable or difficult to be blocked, which should help us get through for damage. Another thing we're going to be building around is a ninja sub-theme, because obviously a lot of ninjas have ninjutsu, so that's a great way to ensure that they just came into play that turn. We also have a few ways to bounce our ninjas back to hand or our creatures back to hand so that we can then play them again and get that ability to trigger again. The wording on the ability also means that you're rewarded if you attack multiple opponents, which means you can get a maximum of 3 5/5 dragons on each combat step, which is really great. However, if you manage to get an additional combat step, you can then attack with those dragons as long as you have 2 mana to give them haste, and then they're going to trigger themselves, thus growing exponentially. For that reason, we also have some extra combat step cards in this deck. So without further ado, let's get started. First up, we have Allura, Merry Thief. This is a pretty cool card because it does almost everything we want in this deck. It can make one of our creatures unblockable, which is fantastic, and then we get to return it to our hand at the beginning of the end step. So we can rebuy enter the battlefield abilities with this, and also we can just recast creatures and give them haste so that they trigger our commander every single turn. Next up, we have Ardor's Cobbler of War. This is an interesting one because it has haste itself, which is obviously great, and it's also going to buff all of our creatures that just entered the battlefield. So all those dragons and all those little creatures we're creating are going to immediately get +2/+0 until end of turn. Of course, if we can't give them haste, that is a bit of a problem, but since our commander can give them haste, that is great. Baleful Strix is all around a really good card, and it works really well with ninjutsu because we can just bring it back to our hand and then recast it again. Also, it has evasion, so it's going to get through fairly easily. Changeling Outcast works great with ninjutsu, and it's also a great way to trigger our commander. Elturel's Survivors is a card that's been growing more and more on me. I think it's really good in most games of commander, and if we have a way to give it haste, it can trigger our commander 3 times immediately, which is really solid. Getting 3 dragons off of just 1 creature is great. Fallen Shinobi is a great card in any ninja deck. It's going to allow us to play stuff for free from our opponent's library, which we really like, of course. Ginger Brute is a very difficult to block 1-drop that has haste, so I couldn't fit this deck more perfectly if it tried. Gix Yawgmoth Praetor I really like in a deck like this that is going to have lots of small creatures that are likely to go unblocked because we're going to draw a ton of cards off of this, and also if they don't remove it, it kind of incentivizes our opponents to attack each other, which is really nice. Goro-Goro is another great way to give our creatures haste if for whatever reason we don't have our commander available, so it makes sense both flavorfully and thematically in this deck. Razilak's Illithid Scholar is an effect similar to Allura, so we can return creatures to our hand if they get blocked. That's kind of nice in certain situations. It's nice to be able to rebuy a creature so that then we can play it the next turn and give it haste again. And then also it's going to draw us cards when our creatures connect, which is probably going to be happening quite a lot. Grim Hireling is going to make tokens when our creatures connect. That, again, is something that should be happening quite a lot in this deck, so we're probably going to get a ton of treasures off of this. Higuri the Stillwind is a great card in any ninja deck because it's going to allow us to search up for any ninja in our library and put it into our hand. And then it's also going to give our ninjas unblockable for 2 mana, so it really does everything we could possibly want. Ingenious Infiltrator is, again, a really good card in a ninja deck. For 2 mana, we can ninjutsu this out of nowhere and maybe draw quite a few cards if we're attacking with ninjas that turn. Inkai's is a ninjutsu card that's more generically good. It fits in a lot of decks, whether it's ninjas or not, and we can just steal the best creature from our opponent's graveyard with this and also regenerate it, so it survives pretty well. Invisible Stalker is a great card to use with ninjutsu decks because it's so easy to get through with it. Karlach Fury of Avernus is one that keeps growing on me more and more. It's a fantastic card, and it's going to give us extra attack steps, which is something that we really want with this deck because of course it's going to synergize so well with our commander. Those tokens that we presumably just got can then attack again and give us even more tokens tokens, so just very solid in this deck, and it's already a great card in any deck, basically. Loyal Apprentice is great with Goro-Goro and Satoru. It's going to make a 1/1 flying haster every turn as long as we have our commander in play, which conveniently triggers our commander to give us a 5/5. Very good. Mistcloaked Herald is another great card to ninjutsu onto. Misplayed Shinobi is great the first time we play it, because we're going to get to bounce a creature to our opponent's hand, and then it works really well with Allura and Grazilax, because we can just rebounce it to hand if they block it. Moon-Circuit Hacker can draw us a card the first time it connects, and then it's going to draw discard if it connects on future times, but we're obviously going to be trying to bounce it to hand, so there's that. Morag Fury of Akum is another great extra combat card. It's also going to buff our team every time they attack, so this works so well with our little unblockables and our big flyers. I love this card in this deck. Ninja of the Deep House is similar to Moon-Circuit Hacker, just a bit more expensive, but a little bit better because we are always drawing a card with this. Phoenix Chick is a card that might seem a little bit odd in this deck, but hear me out. It has evasion and haste, which are two things that we really want with our commander, and actually even if it gets removed, we can just bring it back again from the graveyard later, at which point it's also a creature that just entered, so it's going to trigger our commander again. It's kind of good in this deck. Professional Facebreaker is great in any deck where creatures are going to be connecting a lot, and they certainly are going to be doing so in this deck. It also has evasion of its own, which means it's more likely to connect, and because of that, it also works really well with ninjutsu, so we really like it in this deck. Prosperous Thief works with all ninjas and rogues, and most of our deck is ninjas and rogues, so we're going to be getting so many treasure tokens out of this, it's going to be nuts. Rankle and Torburin is a new card that I really like despite its goofy art, and it's even going to give us some really nice value when it deals combat damage. It can actually choose all of these modes, so we can give everybody a treasure token, or make everybody sacrifice a creature, or we can even go for the third mode, which works really good with our extra combat steps and our evasive creatures. It can deal a ton of damage. Satoru Umezawa works really well by drawing us a card every time we ninjutsu, but not only that, we can actually bring out some of our more expensive cards for cheap, such as Morog, and that can be really good in this deck. So Silver Fur Master is going to make all of our ninjutsu cheaper. That would be enough to include it in this deck, but it's also going to buff all of our ninjas and rogues, so yeah, absolutely perfect in this deck. Slither Blade is another nice unblockable card. It's also a rogue, which works really well with the deck. Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive is just a great way to make sure that most of our ninjas get through even after they ninjutsu, because they all have 1 power or 1 toughness usually. This is going to work really well. Thousand Face Shadow is going to work excellently with our commander by creating a copy that's tapped and attacking, which means it also entered the battlefield this turn, so this is really, really good. By creating a token that's tapped and attacking, which means it entered the battlefield this turn, and crucially, you can choose a different player to attack with this, thus triggering your commander on multiple different players. Tormented Soul is another unblockable 1-drop, as is Triton Shorestalker, which is also a rogue. And then finally, we'll have Yuriko, the Tiger Shadow. Obviously, she's better in the command zone, but in the 99, she's still pretty amazing. Moving on to instance, we have an Offer You Can't Refuse, which is great to protect our board. Bedevil is a nice removal that can catch a lot of different things. Chaos Orb is a commander staple, as is Counterspell. Deadly Rollick is very good in this deck because we want to have ways to interact with our opponent that don't cost mana. Haggard Mauling is another great piece of removal because it can double up as a land. Malakir Rebirth also doubles up as a land but can protect one of our important creatures. Overwhelming Remorse is going to be pretty good in a deck with this many creatures. A few of them are likely to die early, at which point this is going to cost very cheap. Pact of Negation is a great way to interact with our opponent for no mana, although we do have to remember to pay during the next turn. Slaughter Pact basically does the same. It kills off a creature and then we can just pay for it on the turn after. And Wild Magic Surge is going to deal with any permanent for 2 mana. For artifacts, we have Bident of Thassa, which is going to be great with all our little creatures. It can also force our opponents to attack sometimes, which is really nice. Hexplate Wallbreaker is a great way to get extra combat steps in this deck. And Urabrask's Forge works so well because it's going to make a bigger and bigger hasty and trampley creature each turn, which is going to mean triggering our commander should be very easy. For sorceries, we have Agadeem's Awakening, which is particularly good in a deck where creatures can be given haste. Blasphemous Act is probably the best board wiping commander. Feed the Swarm lets us deal with enchantments. We have 3 ways to deal with enchantments in this deck, which is not bad for a red, blue, black deck. Painful Truths should draw us 3 cards for 3 mana. Relentless Assault just gives us an extra combat step, no questions asked. And round 2 does the same, but it only untaps 1 creature, so obviously it's not quite as good as the others. However, since our token dragons come in untapped, they can immediately attack during that extra combat step as long as we can give them haste. For enchantments, we have Determined Iteration to copy our dragon tokens. It can also occasionally copy our Urabrask's Forge tokens, which can be really good. Dragon's Tempest is going to work really well with all those dragon tokens we're making. It's also going to give them haste, so if we can't pay for our commander for whatever reason, we have this out, that's pretty nice. It's also going to deal lots of damage when our dragons come in, which is awesome for finishing the game. And Reconnaissance Mission is another way for our creatures to draw cards when they connect. For planeswalkers, we got Kaito, Dancing Shadow. It's a great way to return all creatures to their owner's hand so we can get their ETBs again or use a ninjutsu again, and it's also going to give us value when we do so. Invasion of Fiora is basically just a board wipe in this deck. Occasionally we might find a way to use it for our advantage, but for the most part we're just going to wipe everything off the board. And then since we have so many unblockable creatures, we can easily flip it onto the other side, and when we do, we get a menace creature that is going to draw cards and remove counters from stuff, so it should be very good. Invasion of Mercadia is basically a loot effect, which is really nice, but if we do get to flip it, the other side can create hasty tokens, so that is something that this deck is very interested in. And finally, for lands, we have Bojuka Bog to clear our opponent's graveyards, Hall of the Bandit Lord, which can give one of our creatures haste, which is obviously great in this deck, and Tectonic Edge to deal with one of our opponent's lands. So there you have it. That has been our Goro-Goro and Satoru deck tech. What do you think about this one? I quite like it, and I'm quite excited to give it a spin as soon as I get a hold of the cards. What do you think? Are there any things you would change? Any additions that you think I missed? Please let me know in the comments section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.